A warm good evening to everyone. Welcome to Lalita Online Forum for Vaishnava Textual Studies monthly lecture series. First of all, I invite Dr. K. Padmanabhan, member
Oh
Sri
my God.
Vishnu Foundation for the welcome address.
Good evening, everyone. I am Padmanabhan from Sri Vishnu Mohan Foundation, T Nagar, Chennai. A very warm welcome to all of you for this fourth monthly meeting of the Lalita Online Forum for Vaishnava Textual Studies. A special welcome to Professor Francis Clooney from Harvard Divinity School, Harvard. He is a very familiar figure in Sri Vishnu Mohan Foundation, having lectured in several of our programs like the seminar on Ramanuja, seminar on Vedanta Desikar, and also some individual lectures he has given. So it's always a pleasure to listen to him. A very warm welcome to you, Professor. And it's also nice to see the previous speakers. We have welcome Dr. Indra, who was the speaker in the inaugural session. I think she spoke on Amla Nadipiran. Then we have I welcome Dr. Sugunya Annakrishnan from University of Hamburg. She spoke, I think, Tirumalai. She spoke on Tirumalizai Alvar's works. I'm not sure. Whether the other. We also had Dr. Chitra speaking on Tondaradipudi Alvar's Tirumalai. A warm welcome to all. And particularly, I extend a welcome to our well-wisher, Dr. T.K. Patsardi. TKP, sir, warm welcome. So today, Professor Clooney will be speaking on God pleasing his people, reading a verse by Poykai Alvar with commentaries. So once again, a warm welcome to all of you. And I hope you will have a very interesting and very enjoyable and profitable 1 hour or 1.5 hours. Now it's over to Dr. Shrikala Nair for the presidential address. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Sri Padmanabhan, sir. Uh, we all work together in Sri Vishnu Mohan Foundation. Good evening to everyone from India. And I think it's morning in US and Canada. Friends, we meet once again virtually to read yet another Alvar, who's too popular among the Vaishnavite scholars as well as practitioners. One thing unique about Vaishnavite scholars is that most of them are, in weak or strong sense, practitioners as well. In Poykai Alvar and his work, Mudal Tiruvandadi consists of 100 pasurams and it's too familiar and popular among the Vaishnavite scholars. The story goes that there's nothing known about the biography as such. He is found near a Poygai, a pond, and that is why he has got the name Poykai Alvar. And he is also seems to have introduced the Andradi style in the Tamil literature, that is, every verse starting with the last syllable of the previous one. He has always been spoken along with the Bhudat Alvar and Pei Alvar, the three together, the, the most senior Alvars. And as the story goes, that these three were together in a where they were stuck in a small dark place and it was heavily raining and they felt that there was a fourth person among them, but though they could not see him, and there was intermittent lightning. And Poigai prayed, it seems, that let there be continuous lightning for the vision of Lord, and that was the occasion when he wrote the pasurams. Not much is known, as I have said, about the origin of all these three ancient alvas. It is believed that they were mysteriously been born, though with regard to the other Alvars, we have specific biographies relating to them and to the clan, the family to which they were born, so on and so forth. Friends, today we have none other than Professor Francis Xavier Clooney to read a verse of Poykai Alvar along with the commentaries. He needs no introduction to the philosophy community in general and Indian philosophers in particular, and all the more to the Sri Vaishnavite scholars. And I'm so pleased and so happy that most of the majority of the scholars, Vaishnavite scholars in the south, have assembled now today, and I look forward for a very good discussion. Uh, I have seen Professor Clooney since my student days in Madras University, and he kept visiting Madras University on and off, and we were also together in several seminars. He has joined the school. I mean, as you all know, that he is currently working in the Harvard School of Divinity, and uh, he has joined the school in 2005, where he is the Parkman Professor of Divinity and Professor of Comparative Theology. After earning his doctorate in South Asian languages and civilization from University of Chicago in 1984, he taught in Boston for 21 years before coming to Harvard. And from 2010 to 17, he was also the director of the Center for the Study of World Religions at Harvard. He's worked extensively on theological commentary writings in Sanskrit and Tamil traditions. Dr. Radha Raghunathan is here, and she personally told me how strong his scholarship in Tamil is, which is amazing to the native scholars in India. As you all know, he is a leading figure in the globe on comparative theology. And to my mind, he is an epitome of, or rather a model on how one can understand, comprehend a non-native religion. And this model we have been having in India for quite some time, and we really celebrate on that. Uh, he has written extensively, as most of you are aware, and some of the recent works, and the most interesting, and a recent publication of Hamas, Hindu and Catholic, Priest and Scholar, a Love Story, published by Bloomsbury, and Hindu and Christian Classics, Why and How It Matters, published by University of Virginia Press, Western Jesuit scholars in India tracing their paths, and Saint Joseph in South India, Poetry, Mission, and Theology. Theology. These are some of the recent works of Professor Clooney. I have heard him greatly down the years, have grown up listening to him, and it was a wonderful experience all through. I'm immensely grateful for him to have conceded. I realize that he is familiar with the Zoom, and probably for the first time that he is attempting with the Google link, but which is something very popular in India. So once again, on behalf of Lalita Online Forum, I extend a very warm welcome to Professor Clooney and invite him to deliver his talk. Over to him.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here with you. As Dr. Padmanabhan said, I have long connection with the Vishnu Mohan Foundation and very fond memories. And so many of you on the screen I have met and have been friends with and heard you speak also, which makes me also feel somewhat shy about presenting because there's so many scholars on the screen. But I will do my best, and then we can talk about what I present to you. So if the screen share could begin and put up the first slide. Okay, so go to the top of that page. Yeah, so there. No, right there. Yeah. And then scroll down a little bit. Starting presupposition. Yeah, stop. Okay. So what I'd like to do with you is share my reflections on one verse of Poykai Alvar, 44 in his Muzzle Tiruvandadi. But these are some presuppositions that I start with, which may be obvious to you, of course, as experts, but I say them because they're helpful to me. By reading carefully the text, we can find our way into an unfamiliar religious tradition. Reading religious poetry with commentaries is especially valuable. And I've always felt this as a very important theme, that sometimes we can be tempted simply to read the Divya Prabandham or read some particular text and ignore all the Vyakyanam of the classic period and the modern period. But I think we appreciate here today how important it is to read with the wisdom of tradition, both ancient and modern. If we read commentaries carefully, we are at the same time learning to read intertextually, because the commentators are often vastly learned people, pundits who know so many texts across both the Tamil and the Sanskrit speaking world. And therefore, when they read one text, they think of 10 others and they go back and forth. And for somebody like myself who comes from outside, to begin to understand that web of interconnections is a point I'd like to make today, how one text reminds them of another text, another text, another text, another text, and we read back and forth. All of this is particularly valuable to a scholar who did not grow up in the tradition that is being studied and did not have the advantage of traditional modes of study. So I came to the study of Tamil only in my late 20s, when I went to the University of Chicago for graduate school and studied some Tamil there with figures like A.K. Ramanujan, Norman Cutler, and others. And then in the 90s, spent some time in Mylapore working with several teachers. And I began to learn, but it was somewhat late in my career. So in this presentation, I'll show all of this with reference to a single example, Poykai Alvar's Muzzle Tiruvandadi 44. Next slide, please. Yes, okay. And so it's a common verse, and I'm sure many of you have remembered it by heart. I'm not a particularly good reader of Tamil, but I'll just read this one so you can see how, how poor my Tamil is, and then I'll read the translation. Tamar uhundada, yevuravam avuravam dane, Tamar uhundada, yeper matraper tamar uhunda, yevanam chintita, imayada irupare, avanam ariyaram. Whichever form pleases his people, that is his form. Whichever name pleases his people, so that is his name. Whichever manner pleases his people, who think upon that unceasingly, that is his manner, he who holds the discus. So it's a beautiful verse, and when I first encountered it, I didn't know anything else about Muzzle Tiruvandadi, but this sense of condescension, he, presumably the Lord, will be adapting to the people. And that's a basic point. Next slide, please. I first encountered Muzzle Tiruvandadi in reading a work called the Alvar Vadaralara by K.R. Govindaraja Muzaliar about 40 years ago, reading his chapter on Andal, which I translated for my class in 1985. Next slide, please. This is the book. I won't say much more about the book, and many of you probably know a lot more about him and about the book. But it's a simple book in 2 volumes, talking about the stories of the Alvars, putting it together, I think, in an accessible form so that people can understand it and read it, written in the 1940s. And so this book I had from my time in Mylapore. And when I was looking for something to use in class about Andal, I realized that the story of Andal in this book was a very useful one. So I translated it for my class in 1985. Next slide, please. And when I was reading it, I came across about 5-7 pages into the story. As you can see, he's in prose is narrating the story of Andal, but then on the right-hand side toward the top, gives this verse 44, from the Mudal Tiruvandadi. And I'm not sure then that I was very clear on Poykai Alvar, Mudal Tiruvandadi, even what this was all about. But the verse is given there as part of the justification. How is it that Andal, Goda, can go to Sri Rangam and be married to the Lord? Next page, please. And so I translated it for my students. And this I haven't really checked, and this probably would have to be corrected after 40 years. But one doe-like woman among Bhattanathar's attendants said to a friend, "Dear friend, in his Rama avatar, the Lord married the daughter of Mithula's king, Sita. As Kanan, he married Rukmini, and so forth. But it does not seem right that now, in his Archa form, Ranganatha should choose to marry Goda." And when the friend heard this, she replied, "Doe-like friend, Periyar said this about our Lord." Move the slide up a bit. Yeah. And then gives the verse. So in justification of the very idea that Andal could go to Sri Rangam and in some way unite with Ranganatha, this verse is brought in as a justification. As the person continues, "Therefore you should have no doubt as to whether the pure Lord of Sri Rangam is gracious to Goda. If the Lord graciously appeared to Prahlada out of one of the carved figures in the golden fort, one of the pillars in the temple, I think I should have said, is it extraordinary that he should be gracious to Goda out of an archa form constructed as his form? Friend, look and see. Many men and women have come from many cities to rejoice in seeing the marriage of Goda." So this is the context in which I first, yes, next slide, I first ran into the verse. And for me, it was, again, new. And it was only much later, as I say here, maybe you could make the font a little bit smaller so that we can see more of on the page. If that's too small, you could make it a little bit bigger. But basically, it was years later when I saw the verse, which I have in bold print in the middle there, as part of the 100 verses of the Mudal Tiruvandadi. And remember, I was not very familiar with the Andadis when I began the work, and certainly when I first translated the story of Andal. So I put it in here in context, partly to point out that it's actually very challenging, and you might say even peculiar, to read the Andadis through, verse after verse after verse, because it would be nice if there was a clear theme that followed from one verse to the next. But as often, as I think you all know better than I, it's often puzzling why one verse carries another. So I give here on the page the two before and the two after verse 44, and I'll just read the one before and the one after. So 44, the accessibility of the Lord, however, in whatever form or name or manner is pleasing to the people. But the previous verse, defects of mind end or come to an end, hard deeds do not come near. All becomes wealth that falls right into their hands if they offer flowers and water at his feet, who wears fresh tulsi that grows in Punam fields, and if they keep worshiping him, they are his people. So there's a certain accessibility there that if they keep worshiping him, then they become Tamar, they become his people. And this seems to set up the following verse, the one that we're talking about. And then the next verse seems to be claiming in some way that this is even better than what's available to the gods themselves. Yes, knowing may be possible for immortals, but we too know, dear heart, the great ascetic dwells in the lotus, and when the demon with the sword touched his feet with his 10 heads, the Lord counted them with his toes. That's his nature. So it's part of an ongoing reflection, we can talk about this later, in which the Alvar is reflecting on how the Lord is accessible to the people. And verse 44 stands out, but it really should be read in context like this, and we can come back to this point. Next slide. So what I did, and many of you are more expert on these items than I am, learning from, as I say, not just simply reading the verses and translating them or simply using commentaries for a word here and there, but reading with the great readers of tradition. So in this case, obviously beginning with Periyavachan Pillai and Appillai, who comments on Periyavachan Pillai. And then in the edition that I have, and I think many of us have, Krishnasamy Iyengar, his edition of Periyavachan Pillai, Appillai, and the Andadi, giving ample commentary and ample exposition by himself at the bottom of every page. It's a brilliant book. And then for the sake of a different commentator, but obviously in the same tradition, Uttamur, Viraragavacharya. I could have used Anangaracharya too, of course, no prejudice against him, but I thought one would be enough in this case. So I was reading, in the last months, really, but also in preparation for today, how Periyavachan Pillai, Pillai, Krishnasamy Iyengar, Uttamur comment on our verse. Next slide. And here, again, in my own translation, which if you see anything that seems to be clearly wrong, we could discuss the Tamil on another occasion. But he begins his commentary on the verse by commenting on the word the Tamar, his own people. When the noble ones are his own people, there is no need to pose obstacles to them, for one can say that his Swarupa lies in dependence on those who depend on his Swarupa. And that is a very succinct and I think beautiful way of talking about what's going on, so that those who depend on him, that makes some sense. They're his own people. They're entirely dependent on the Lord. They belong to him in every way. But then the corresponding beautiful claim, even more astounding, his Swarupa lies in depending on them. And so the mutual dependence of the people who belong, devotees, the Ariargal, on the Lord, and then the Lord depending on the people. And this kind of mutual dependence, Pillai adds in his opening comment, thus far in preceding verses of the Mudal Tiruvandadi have said, those who take refuge do service, completely taking refuge with the Lord and then serving the Lord, Adimai, in every way. Here the Lord has forms and names which gladden those people. Here his service lies in conforming himself to devotees by means of Archavatara. And this becomes clear. This is a key point, that we're talking not about the avatars, the bhava, or other forms of accessibility, even in the heart, but the Archavatara comes to the fore here. And this is the way he serves the people, by being accessible, Saulabhya. And Krishnasamy Iyengar in his comment says, in the previous verse, it says, verse 43, as I quoted, if they keep on worshiping him, they are his people. After they see him, they worship. But one asks, how can there be seeing? If those at his feet think to offer service in this way, then he conforms himself to them, having forms and names that gladden them. Thus he serves in this world by Archavatara. And what's interesting there, I think, to stay there for a moment, what I think is interesting there is the question that arises, as we saw even in that small book about Andal, how is it possible really to see the Lord? This is impossible, even great yogis can't do this and so on. But the theme obviously is that those who offer service, who desire to see the Lord will come to them in forms by names that gladden them. And this is his service to the people. So even though it's impossible to see the Lord, it then becomes possible by divine grace. Next slide. And Uttamur, in his introduction, this is part of what he says. Above have been explained, previous verses, worshiping and thinking upon the Lord. In whichever form one focuses on the Lord, whose forms are para, vyuha, vibhava, harda, and archa, then let them think upon and worship that form. Let them take as the form whatever way is pleasing to their mind. You might say their mind and heart, even apart from well-known forms. There is no obstacle in saying, or to saying, this is his form. So whatever form comes to mind, the imagination, that is the form. One cannot say the Lord of all cannot take on various forms. So in his forms is Rama, Krishna, his vibhavas, his are 4 arms or 2 arms. He has ways of being as Pattabhiraman, as Kaliya Mardanan. He takes on so many lovely forms. Well, so too in Archa, his are many forms that please the mind. His forms can be fashioned of many substances, gold, silver, copper, stone, clay, and so forth. Cannot one worship the one who holds the discus, thought of or imagined in this way? So he too is stressing, and the allusion there, gold, copper, silver, refers to a text that will be quoted later, that the accessibility is actually now superior, that in the avatars, long ago and far away, there were avatars as Rama, Krishna, and so on. But now, whether you make something of costly gold or silver, copper, stone, maybe even draw a photo on a picture on a piece of paper, one can worship that way and it works. Next slide. Here, I begin to say, I shouldn't really say further anecdotes, but rather there are stories that begin to be introduced about how this works in the tradition. So in commenting on the first line, whatever form pleases his people, he takes that form. Periyavachan Pillai refers to two anecdotes revolving Yempe Ramanuja, how he's out going from house to house, and he sees some boys who've drawn an image of the Lord on the dirt, on the dust in the street. I think in play, but also kind of mimicking what goes on in the temple. When he sees it, he falls prostrate before the image drawn by the boys. And I think they ask him, it goes on to say, well, how is it, aren't you being embarrassing by throwing yourself on the ground in front of an image that the boys make? Well, no, because the boys are pleased, they're devout, they're reaching the Lord in this way, and therefore it really is an image of the Lord. And therefore I honor it like the image in the temple. In a similar story, it seems to be a distinct one, boys, I'm not sure, probably not the same boys, draw an image of Ranganatha and Naichimar, the goddess, in the dust next to one another. And he not only prostrates himself, but because he wants prasad, he takes some of the dust on the road as prasadam. And that vivid sense of the great Ramanuja, the great Acharya, taking almost literally what we see in Tiruvandadi 44, I think is a beautiful theme. Periyavachan Pillai also mentions here from the Yudhakanda 117, how the Lord is entirely immersed in the scene, whatever is presented. And this is when the gods and others are scolding Rama, as it were, for not remembering who he is and for asking Sita to step into the fire and so on. We could look it up, 117. And Rama says, I was thinking my form to be merely a human form, that of Rama, son of Dasharatha. Thus he admits that he is entirely caught up in his accessible presence for humans. And I think this, we could talk about this as an interpretation of Ramayana, but the idea seems to be that in service, making the Swarupa available to devotees, Rama is so caught up in being accessible that he even forgets his divine form. And this is kind of an extreme case of the total dedication of the Lord to the form that is available. Next slide. And then Periyavachan Pillai also, when talking about whatever name pleases that name, in the second line of verse 44, he refers to this story, and probably very familiar to many of you. Vishnu Chitan learned that the Ayurdeva, I suppose the god of the cowherds, is the name of the Lord that pleased Nunjir. And therefore, he only says it somewhat briefly. There'll be more elaboration later. But that if that pleases Nunjir, then the Lord says, well, that's my name. And likewise, Sarangai Alahir, which I think is something like beautiful Lord with anklet bells, that becomes the name preferred by the Lord over all other names. And he even appears to the devotee wearing ankle bells. And so these are stories from the tradition, which always struck me as very important, because it shows that it's not simply we have the poetry and then we have theological claims, but there are figures in tradition, Nunjir, Vishnu Chitan, and others, who have these moments of experience that show them the truth of what they're talking about. Next slide. Similarly, in his commentary on the verse, Uttamor elaborates, so shifting over to Uttamor from Periyavachan Pillai, mentions the same incidents. In his Vibhava form, his names are such as Rama, Krishna, Gopala. In the Archa form, his names are Srinivasa, Varada, Ranganatha, and he has auspicious Tamil names like Nambi, Arava, and so on. And here's an example. So Nunjir gave the name Ayurdeva to his domestic Archa. the Lord as Ayurdeva appeared in a dream to Yengalalvan. I'm not sure if that's Vishnu Chitan, you can tell me later, and said, I want Navarpalam. One text I look at said that's blueberries. I defer to experts on what Navarpalam is. And he appeared in a dream and said, I want the Navarpalam. And Yengalalvan asked him, well, who are you? And he said, I am Nunjira's son. I am the Ayurdeva. And later, when addressing Nunjir, Yengalalvan said, your Pillai has decided to come and settle down with us. And in this way, I think Yengalalvan is asserting the essence of the matter. If that is the way Nunjir speaks of the Lord, and that is the name he gives him, then the Lord becomes that deity for Nunjir, and then appearing in a dream to Yengalalvan, appears that way and says, I am the child, I am the son of Nunjir in a certain way, and therefore I will come that way, and that's the way it is. This is not fiction, but has a certain kind of meditative truth to it, which I think is very beautiful. Next slide. So here I've become fascinated by the intertext, as I mentioned at the very beginning, how the slides are, how the commentators are reminded of other texts, both in Sanskrit and Tamil, by the text they're reading. And those of you who are expert in the commentaries, as many of you are, know that everywhere in the commentaries, certainly on any of the Alvars, but certainly in the Bhagavad Vishayam and so on, there are many parallels. One verse reminds somebody of something in Sanskrit, reminds somebody else of something in Tamil, and so on. And the key text that is quoted by Parivachan Pillai and all the later commentators is Bhagavad Gita 4:11. As these take refuge with me, in just that way do I love them, Bhajami. Everywhere, Partha, humans follow my path or follow my way. And this seems to be taken almost as the equivalent in Sanskrit of verse 44 that we're looking at. That as people come to me, in that way do I love them or participate in them. And they take this as therefore a parallel text. And as we'll see, in commenting on Gita 4:11, we'll bring in some of the parallels that are also used with Mudal Tiruvandadi 44. At this point, Parivachan Pillai also quotes from the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana 103, as he's explaining the anecdote that I just mentioned of Ramanuja worshiping an image drawn by the boys in the dust. And he gives this verse. This is a translation that I borrowed. This is not my translation. Out of gold and silver and so forth, he makes a very lovely image of Vishnu with gracious eyes and productive of his delight. Superimposing on this image Brahman, let Brahman become such in his mind. Let him worship it, let him offer obeisance, let him sacrifice to it, let him meditate on it, and in that way he removes impurities and he attains that form of Brahman. Now this is kind of a technical point. We could talk for an hour about this, I suppose. This superimposition. So having an image of Vishnu and then putting an image of Brahman on it, or the image of Vishnu on the image of Brahman, is adhyasa, adhyaropa, which of course shows up in Shankara as well. But the idea that if Brahman, the great awesome reality, is too much to imagine, to think about, to be devoted to, then having a lovely image of Vishnu with gracious eyes causing delight, letting that be the way into the understanding of Brahman is what works. And this is in the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, which they take as encouragement of what the Alvar is talking about. So having imposed this Vishnu image and the Brahma image, he can worship it, he can do prostrations, obeisance, he can sacrifice to it, offer puja, he can meditate on it. And in that way, he attains, you might say, Brahman in that form, which I think is very beautiful. But it's a validation from a Sanskrit text of the same point. And then Pillai, at the bottom of the page there, summarizes the meaning of this citation, which I think means Vishnu Dharmottara Purana, in this way: the Lord does not consider his own greatness, but holds as his own forms, names, and deeds those which please the people who take refuge with him. So you can see they're making the same point again and again about the form that pleases the people. Thus, Poykai Alvar reflects on and makes known the excellence of the nature of the image form with which the Lord serves those who take refuge with him. So again, back to Poykai Alvar, in his small verse, is really saying what the Gita says, the Purana says, that the Lord is willing to come in an imaginable form, an archa form, in order to serve the people. And that text in Sanskrit and Tamil verifies the same point. Next slide. Uttamar, in his continuing commentary on the verse of the Alvar, takes this from the Jitante Stotra. This form, the form is not yours, nor the figure, nor the weapons, nor the foundation. So nate, rupam, and so on. Rather, the figure of the person, purushakara, belongs to your devotees, and thus you shine forth. Now, this is somewhat technical, and some of you might want to comment on it later. But it seems to be saying, your rupa and your akara, your weapons, the ayudani, the foundation, the basis, all of these really don't belong to you. They are at the service of your devotees. You've given it over to them. And so the purushakara, the form you take, I suppose, as a person, in this case, belongs to your devotees, and they can use rupa, akara, etc., as ever they wish. The weapons might refer to the discus that's in the verse of the Alvar. And thus you shine forth, you become evident in the form that your devotees chose. And now the other equally important with the Bhagavad Gita 4.11, Krishna Swami Iyengar here introduces Tiruvai Mori 3.6.9. He himself is our surety, our mother and father, but yet not just those. Foremost in the clan of flawless immortals, first among the three, people of the world, don't be worried. Don't ask, is this one that one? The one you ponder in your heart is indeed the deep-colored one, the deep-colored Lord. And I think this is beautiful because, again, it's too, I think the verse is sort of saying it's almost too simple to believe. So this is the great Lord. He is our father, our mother. He's more than that. He's foremost of all the gods. He's first among the three, the Trimurti. And don't be worried saying, is this one that one? And I think this means something like, is this one who's devotionally important to me? Is it really that great one? Or is it impossible and silly for a devotee to imagine the image that I have is that of the great one? No. And the last line, the one you ponder in your heart is indeed the Lord who is deep sea in color. And this, the last line in particular, as I read it, in both the commentary on Mudal Tiruvandadi 44, but also on the Gita and so on, becomes a site of further citations. Next slide. So here, I shift over for a moment to Tiruvai Mori 3.6.9. And here, remembering the same context, Nambilai in the Iru cites Mudal Tiruvandadi 44, now to explain Tiruvai Mori 3.6.9. He also quotes Gita 4.11, the text we looked at, and as we also looked at, Vishnu Dharmottara Purana 103.16. And this, again, for me is a learning experience because you begin to say, all these texts are used to explain the Alvar, verse 44. Now with Nam Alvar in Tiruvai Mori, the same verses are now being used, mutual illumination. So Tiruvai Mori 3.6.9 is used to illuminate Mudal Tiruvandadi 44, and now Mudal Tiruvandadi 44 is being used to illumine 3.6.9. And the Gita comes in, and Vishnu Dharmottara Purana comes in. And here Nampillai brings in another text, Sri Rangaraja Stavam 274. Let us cease counting of your births overflowing with auspicious qualities, as well as the numbering of the groups of your qualities, O Lord at Sri Rangam. You delight in being worshipped in this world in temples and homes and hermitages, bearing all things, and in a condition of complete dependence on the temple priests. Tender-hearted persons are stunned at this character of yours. So this verse, I think, is seen as a friendly further addition, Nancy Nier's translation, We can go on forever counting your births and all your qualities. This would be all too much for us. But you delight in being worshipped in temples, homes, and hermitages. Wherever your devotees are, they worship you in their own way. You endure all the things your devotees do to you. They carry you around, they put you on the shelf, and so on. And complete dependence on the priests who do the puja. If they do it well, that's one thing. If they do it carelessly, that's another thing. Tender-hearted persons are stunned at this character of yours, how accessible you are and dependent on your people. So this again is another verse that's brought in to explain the same point. Next slide. And in the Gita commentary, so Krishnasamy Iyengar, as you all know, has a beautiful 4 or 5 volume commentary on the Bhagavad Gita according to tradition. I pointed out to people it's often unknown to Western scholars, but it's a very fine commentary. So having seen there that Tiruvai 369 becomes the site for many of the same texts, likewise, Krishnasamy Iyengar sees, well, obviously, there is the same connection with Gita 411. Mudal Tiruvandari is cited by Krishnasamy Iyengar, also Tiruvai 369. They're now being used to explain the Gita text. And he also adds the same quote from Jitanti Stotra 1.5, which reinforces the theme of divine accessibility. And he brings in 2 more passages from the Vishnu Purana. I see the face of Vishnu with the lotus eyes, which once seen even by the imagination, some kalpanamayam, remove the sin of humans. And it seems here that the point is that the samkalpana is kind of, as translated here, imagination. And so as you imagine the Lord and you close your eyes and you imagine Vishnu with lotus eyes, even if it's an imperfect image, it's simply what any one person thinks, this becomes efficacious in removing impurity, sin, and so forth. And another passage from Vishnu Purana 5.7.67, having withdrawn from sense objects, yogis imagine the Lord's form in their hearts, and in meditation they worship it. And this I think is interesting because we'd have to go look more closely at the Vishnu Purana 5.7 passage, but that the yogis who withdraw from the world around them, who become basically given over to interior meditation, then they too imagine the Lord's form in their hearts. In meditation, they worship it as such, and it works for them because they've interiorized the Lord, and that's very efficacious in how they do this. So that, again, it's further Mudal Tiruvandari 44, Tiruvai 369, Gita 411. The same passages keep being brought up, showing that all 3 of them are really talking about the same reality. Next slide. I'm almost getting near the end, and I was getting ambitious at one point, starting to look in other works for uses of Mudal Tiruvandari 44. And I actually looked into Vedanta Deshika, the Srimad Rahasya Trayasara, and found a passage or 2 there where Mudal Tiruvandari 44 comes in. I decided enough is enough. And so I just have this passage from Manavala Mamunigal in his commentary on the Tattvatraya of Pillai Lokacharya, number 200. And here he cites again, in commenting on Pillai Lokacharya, both Mudal Tiruvandari 44 and the Sri Rangaraja Stavam 274, which we've seen. So this is the translation by Patricia Mummi of the Vyakyanam. Archavatara is the state of his presence in temples and houses possessing all the functions which are under the control of devotees, overlooking the shortcomings of devotees, residing without precondition regarding place, time, and fitness of the person who worships. So this is a bit hard to understand in the way it's translated, but that the Lord is in the temple, the Lord is in the house and under the control of devotees, as I said before, putting it in a shrine, putting it on the bookcase, treating it one way or another. There are no niyamas that say you have to do it only this way, as long as it's respectful. Time, place, fitness, and so on of the person who worships. Unlike specific forms of Vibhava, the avatar, he is present in the material of the choice of conscious beings. As is said, whatever form is pleasing to them, that form he assumes. That is to say, according to the words of Poykai Alvar, whichever form pleases his people, that is his form. So our text comes in here to explain what Pillai Lokacharya is saying in his text. As the Lord takes the form for himself, which the devotees imagine as his divine body, he makes himself present in any material which devotees choose, gold, silver, stone. So we know that already, we've seen that. Whatever devotees can afford, it's like that. So here it's not any distinct or special form of manifestation, incarnation such as Rama, Krishna, and so on, where he made himself present by a fixed norm. So there's certain things that are out of the control of devotees. Rama is Rama, Krishna is Krishna. But in the Archavatar and the temple or at home, you can use your own imagination, pious imagination. Here there is no norm regarding place. As is said, your real delight is being worshipped in this world in temples, homes, and hermitages. And that's echoing Sri Ranga Rajastavam. There is no rule which limits time, space, and form in some established way, which I think means within normal bounds. Every devotee can do this in their own way, and you can tell me how this works because you would know far better than I. The Lord overlooks the shortcomings of devotees. He is tolerant, as it says, bearing all things in the condition of complete dependence upon the temple priest. So the same passage. So again, these things are mutually reflecting one another, and Manavala Mamunigal, like Vedanta Deshika, whom I don't quote, is aware of this and using this in their own work as well. Next slide. So back to where we started, if you think, this journey as it comes to an end, in 1985, I came across Mudal Tiruvandadi 44 in Govindaraja Mudaliar's citation of the verse in his popular telling of the Andal story. And then what I've learned, again, coming from my position in the West and so forth, is that when you take even one verse, one pashuram seriously, it begins to open up a whole universe. And you begin to learn so much more than you knew in the beginning. Next slide. And here I'll just give you, pondering of where we are and how this works. So this is kind of a chart of even just the text, the intertext connections. So Mudal Tiruvandadi, that brings into play Bhagavad Gita 4:11, Tiruvaimori 3:6-9. And then I give you a list there of some of the passages that were quoted along the way. And I think part of the education, you might say, of the devotee and also of the scholar, it should be, is to realize that all of these texts go together. And just reading Bhagavad Gita is wonderful, but not enough. Tiruvaimori is wonderful, not enough. Mudal Tiruvandadi is wonderful, not enough. All of these texts belong together and should be understood and appreciated together. And that, I think, is a fuller education, which of course then takes a whole lifetime. It goes on forever and ever. Next slide. And this again, takes me back to my original passage. And now when I come back to this, having gone through with you all of this, I realize how much depth there is to the question. So the woman asked, how can possibly anyone imagine that Lord Ranganatha in the temple would marry or have, unite with Goda? This verse shows it that for a very long time before the 1940s, all of this has been thought about and paid attention to. And that gives me a much better sense of going back and rereading the hagiography and understanding why this verse was quoted at this point. A couple more things. Next slide. A little bit of an addendum, and this may surprise you. Having translated the story of Andal from my class in 1985, a few years later, I was asked to contribute to this book, Many Mansions, which is a biblical quote, Multiple Religious Belonging and Christian Identity. And the book was supposed to be about, if you are a Christian, how much can you relate to or learn from other religious traditions? And what I realized when I thought, what would I write for this book, my little chapter, that this example of Mudal Tiruvandadi 44 would be a perfect example, because the imagination, the impulse of the devotee works with God coming in that form. So for the Christian among the Christian, the Vaishnava among the Vaishnava, the Buddhist among the Buddhist, and also if you cross over and begin to see both together, I tried to talk about this. Next page. And so I can send you this essay if anyone wants to read it. But I write this essay, and this is just the first page. Multiple belonging, God for us, is really echoing Mudal Tiruvandadi 44 and Bhagavad Gita 4:11. God is for us as we are, and therefore we should not be surprised if we find God in different ways. So what I'd like to think, maybe somewhat fancifully, is that having started with the Alvar, the Gita, Tiruvaimori, all these other quotes, then the hagiography from the 40s, and then even my little article become part of the same kind of expansion now across religious boundaries. And the next one is the final slide. So here, in conclusion, and I think this just pulls things together and then we can talk about it. Mudal Tiruvandadi 44 is widely taken as disclosive of the general truth of God's adaptability, condescension, echoed in other verses in other Tamil and Sanskrit texts. We saw that. Mudal Tiruvandadi 44 is a node, like a crossroads, in a web of connections, as are Gita 4:11 and Tiruvaimori 3:6-9. These texts all kind of bring the wisdom together. All three are profitably read together. Therefore, read the Andadi, the Gita, Tiruvaimori together. They're read together because the tradition has for a long time thought of them together, read them together, back to the time of Parivachan Pillai, probably to Ramanuja himself, realizing that these things are all interconnected and belong together, Sanskrit or Tamil, it doesn't matter. Theologically, the three texts reinforce the point that Archavatara shows the depth of divine adaptability, because the Archavatara is in a sense vulnerable. You can be small one, large one, made of gold, made of wood, made of clay. You can put it on the shelf, you can put it in the shrine. If it's small, you can put it in your pocket when you travel. It's very adaptable and vulnerable. As a mode of study, though, the study of a verse, such as the one I gave and its commentaries, shows value of a very focused manner of reading and learning, in part due to the web of learning displayed as citations are added from Sanskrit as well as Tamil sources. And again, I stress this point because for somebody like me, who began my education late in life, I was 29 when I started even learning the first words of Tamil, is that entering into the tradition by taking a single verse, Mudal Tiruvandadi 44, begins to open up a larger world. And then studying Tiruvaimori, studying Andal, and so on, the world begins to grow because the great pundits, the great acharyas who explain these texts are making all these connections for us in advance. As my example, the intertext widens over time, as with the hagiography of Andal by Govindaraja Mudaliar, and my use of it in my essay. This is learning and interreligious learning, not from theory down, like I have a theory about world religions or a theory about Hinduism, but rather from the text up. Some people say we don't have time to read the single verses, and therefore we have to have a theory of religion. I think it's actually better to take the time to start with something particular and then go from there. This way of reading is a very good way to learn one's way into a venerable tradition that is at the start not one's own. So thank you for listening to me, and I'll stop there and I guess we can have some conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor, for that lovely presentation. So, Mudal Tiruvandadi 44, in some substance, seem to leave the message that God is for us and Lord loves assuming forms that his dear devotees choose to pray. And Professor Clooney has given different versions or possible readings of this verse 44, primarily trying to show us how different texts support the same principle. For instance, Bhagavad Gita 4:11, which says, Ye dhamam prapadyante tam tadhaiva bhajamyaham. And he also parallelly quotes from Thiruvaimozhi 3:6-9, which also resonates the same principle. So in some instance, we see how the Vibhava giving the Vibhava forms giving way to the Archavatara, where Lord is pleased to assume the forms which the devotees choose to worship. And I'm reminded of, I don't remember exactly where I read, where the gods, being jealous of each other, saying that, oh, you are more Kavya Prasiddha than me. So being Kavya Prasiddha is, a privilegious position even for gods, because if you are Kavya Prasiddha, then someone is saying that, Sri Rama in the childhood is not Kavya Prasiddha. So being Kavya Prasiddha is something unique even for gods, and how, the mutual give and take, Lord prompting the devotees to give in for kavyas or write kavyas, and in turn, Lord assuming the forms given in the kavyas. So there seems to be a hermeneutic circle that has
Mhm.
been involved in this. So thank you very much, Professor Clooney, for that. Great scholars are in the audience. So may I request Professor Indra to start the discussion?
Madam, I'll be the next.
You initiate, ma'am, and then we will listen to it.
Thank you, Frank. Can you hear me?
Very
Yes,
Greetings to you.
thank you. Nice to see you. Thank you.
I'll come at the end. There are great scholars here.
all right. In case, then can you please raise hands? Yes. Uh, Dr. Radha Raghunathan, please go ahead.
Yeah. Uh, Professor Clooney, I always look upon him as my father and my teacher, my mentor. There's no end to my gratitude to him. So I really don't know. But again, a very, very illuminating talk by him, which, I gather a lot of information and get to know more things from him all the time. And so was this time also. And I have to, he himself has read this text which we did together, Shashivana Bodham, where Tatvarayar also, when he begins his text, he begins with this prayer, let Brahman take that form
Mm.
which his devotee wants. Let
Wow.
him be known in whatever form they want to know him by. So I think, this seems to be a very a universal way in which, the saint poets and all these great preceptors seem to approach a devotee or maybe a learner in any particular religion or any particular philosophy, for them to get to know what Brahman is or get to know what the Lord is. Professor will be able to throw more light on that, because he himself knows that text which I am talking about.
Mm. Thank you, Professor Radha. Always nice to see you and see you face to face again. Thank you for coming. So you're right. I didn't even think of that. I mean, so we did work on that some time back, and now I would want to go run to my shelf and look at that as well, because it wasn't meant to be exclusive, like only
Yes.
with Tiruvandari 44 and only this and only that. But then the theme becomes even more persuasive if you realize that there are many parallels.
Yes.
And I think seeing that in other texts, such as the Shashivana Bodham, makes it even more persuasive. And I also can say that in that essay I wrote for the volume Many Mansions, I talk
Yes.
about parallels in Christian tradition, how the sense of as you imagine and see God, so God will be for you. So it opens up an interreligious theme where we are not competing with
Yes.
one another, but sharing the same insight.
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Sukanya?
Yeah, hi, Frank. Thank you so much for that lovely talk. I was wondering what you were going to make of just one verse, and I see that you were able only to scratch the surface, and there's so much more to do. So that's an eye opener. And the second thing I wanted to say is, yes, it's so very true that all these links that the acharyas make. You take one verse, it reminds them of this text and that text, and it's incredible. Yes, I never really thought, of this thing in that direction. Just another remark. So as you were saying that you didn't have a look at, at least you didn't present P.B. Annangaracharya's interpretation. Here, I just opened it very quickly. I had a look, and something really struck me, just because you said, one thing reminds people of something else. So basically what he says here is, when he speaks of the ashritas, he says, "Enda roopattayum, enda namattayum itarargal uhandiruppargalo, அந்த ரூப நாமங்களையே உடையனாக தன்னை அமைத்துக்கொண்டு அர்ச்சாவதார ரூபியாய்," etc. So basically, exactly what the verses says and what you said and all the Vyakyatas said. Basically, he accepts any rupa, any nama that the ashritas give him, and that made me think of the Chandogya Upanishad word that the Sri Vaishnavas quote all the time, Nama Rupa Vyakaravani. So basically, God is the creator. He decides, okay, I'm going to create, I'm going to give, this is going to be the Nama and the Rupa of this thing. So every single thing in this world comes into being because he decides Nama Rupa Vyakaravani. And what happens here is he gives that position as a creator to his devotees and allows them to do the same with him, to decide the name and the form that they give him. That just struck me right, when I had a look at that Vyakyanam. That's all I wanted to tell you. Thanks once again for that wonderful talk. Thank you so much.
No, that's beautiful. I mean, both again, Sri Anangaracharya, again, I left him out only for sake of time, not because he was less important. And as you can do, and I really can't do, I'm thinking of all the oral discourses one could call on, all the, like Velakudi Krishnan and others, who are probably talking about this all the time in Tamil that's way too fast for me to understand, and therefore I can't follow it. But nonetheless, it's there. But I would just highlight your own work, Suganya, and everyone I'm sure knows. I'm thinking of your latest, one of your latest books, I'm not sure which is the latest, For My Blemishless Lord, a study of 3 Sri Vaishnava commentaries on Tirupan Alvar's Amal and Adiparan. What you do there for people reading, for anybody really, but also people reading in English, is to make available some of this wisdom of the Sampradaya and the tradition. And it's all there for people to follow up on in ways that is just impossible to imagine 40, 50 years ago, that this could be in English, this kind of complexity. I'll also look up the Chandogya passage and see what Ramanuja and others have to say about that. That's great, Lee. Thank you.
Sure.
Professor Anandagiri.
Thank you so much, Professor Clooney and Professor Srikala and friends. So I am joining you from the train from Nanded. So I am just thinking about this way of reading and learning that Professor Clooney is outlining. It is in that spirit I am thinking a few thoughts that I want to offer. One is this methodology of text from the bottom up, and it is also an hermeneutic dimension. So how do we read text? My submission is that there is a possibility to link working and reading together. In fact, our teachers, they not only read and wrote, they also worked. So I wish to submit a way of reading which can be called a foot meditative hermeneutics.
Okay.
And about intertextuality, and it is a known way, but intertextuality also overflows. My second submission is, how do we realize the limits of intertextuality and moving towards something transtextual? And that transtextual involves a dynamics of transcendence, and how do we cultivate that? And finally, there is also a transpositionality at work. And so, as you are suggesting in your own life and work, that when we move across positions, that we just not remain into what we are positioned. So therefore, this way of reading and learning also has a dimension of transpositional, and today that can be also cultivated in a conscious manner, so that we can fulfill the very important way of reading and learning that you have outlined. Thank you.
Mhm. Thank you very much. I just one follow-up question. Natagiri, nice to see you. Thank you for tuning in on the train. The walking hermeneutic, how does that work? So walking and commenting or walking and reading, why is the walking important?
Like when we are reading a text, and this text is not just being read in a closed position, and when our teachers were walkers, Sankara walked quite a lot, and so Ramanuja. So therefore, when we are reading something, if we read while it walking, and it opens up new meaning, new layers of meaning.
Okay.
And therefore your bottom up hermeneutics, your very important way of moving from the text up, and that can be combined with a working hermeneutics, so
Okay.
that, and it is not individually, it is also can be done in circles, a few friends reading while walking, and the kind of
Yeah.
new revelations that
Yeah.
emerge, which may not be possible when one is just sitting closed,
Mm.
within an ashram or within a library.
Okay. That's very beautiful. It reminds me of some of the Greek philosophers thought that their best thinking was when they were walking in the Greek world. So that too is important. I think your point on transcendence too is important, that it's not simply a matter of the text and only the text as if that's the end of the story. But as I think these texts that were quoted and I read point out, the words and the imagination then open up into actual encounter with the reality. And the reality is always larger than the words and larger than the imagination. So it has to be this kind of generous sense of start, as I said, and you echoed, from the text up. But it's not simply a matter of having more books or more words, but it opens up into something greater, which then, as you say, is kind of trans-situational as well. So thank you very much for that. That's wonderful.
Is there anyone else? If not, over to Professor Indra.
I might just like to,
Oh, I'm sorry, Padmanabhan sir.
No, after
yeah,
that. Yes.
yeah.
Padmanabhan.
I just want to. It's not a question. It's just an observation that okay, though the Alvar gives you a lot of liberty and freedom to worship, for example, the image in whatever form you want and all that. Normally, when we say, take Lord Ranganatha, for example, I mean, we only think of him and in the reclining posture with the serpent and all that. And we don't give different forms and all that. But one God who lends himself to different forms is Lord Ganesha. So he's all over India. He is popular, and for example, during the Cricket World Cup, you have so many statues of Vigrahas of Ganesha with a cap and a cricket bat and playing cricket. You have Ganesha with a guitar and in a rock band. All sorts of Ganesha idols are available in the market, and always there used to be a debate. The traditionalists or the purists will say, what is this? This is blasphemy. You cannot show God in these forms. But now that reading this Alvar's, Poykai Alvar's text, I think, why not?
Yeah.
This just observation I wanted to make. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, we have the same issue in the West with Christmas is coming. And with Christmas coming, there's all kinds of using of Christian images, biblical images for advertising, commercial advertising. And much of it is simply crass, commercialization. But sometimes it's people trying to express devoutly a point that they want to make in a new way, and they tell a story that's not in the Bible and so on. And some of that we can dismiss, but some of it we have to realize that some of these people are devout in what they're doing. And I think what I'd love to have known, so I mentioned the two anecdotes of Ramanuja walking and seeing the boys sketching in the dust. Was it the reclining Ranganatha, or were the boys imagining some other form? Probably it's the reclining Ranganatha. But he was not bothered by the artistic excellence of their drawing, but he said, okay, let's go with that. So, but you're opening up a whole new realm by referring to the World Cup and Ganesha. Thank you.
That's it. Over to you, ma'am. Professor Indra.
Thank you, Frank. Continuing from Mr. Padmanabhan's observation, reverse it. MS Dhoni was projected by his devotees, I should say, as Mahavishnu, and therefore traditional believers, they went to court saying that how dare you just make a human being see into Mahavishnu. Such thing can happen. Maybe that's one of the what shall I say, inherent principles of Hinduism, which allows you a tremendous amount of flexibility, and it accommodates all kinds of imaginations, adaptations, configurations, and so on. And poor MS Dhoni was asked to appear in the court.
Yes.
Blasphemy and so on. So Mr. Padmanabhan's query put me, because cricket is also my favorite topic. At the same time, when Padmanabhan sir said that we imagine him only as a reclining Ranganatha, I'm not very familiar with Sri Rangam because I come from Chidambaram, as I repeatedly said. In the various utsavams, they present him, now Tirupati also, in various kinds of forms, not necessarily the reclining Ranganatha. So various mounts, the Vahanas, Mohini Avataram, this and that, Saraswati Avataram, it used to baffle me a lot. But that is also possible, not inside the sanctum, probably in the way in which the utsavams are conducted. This is something of a sociological aspect, which is accommodated in the way in which this 44th verse is presented. And in a very humble way, may also say, in the presence of scholars like Dr. Sukanya and Radha, I have no business to speak, but I felt that before the hardening of Vaishnava faith, or some kind of consolidation into a specific form, there is a kind of an openness or a looseness or a fluidity in which some of these early poems can be placed. That is why he can be in the Vibhava form or some other form, and the various possibilities are given. And at the end, you quoted, you see how in a yogi's mind, in the meditation, the forms can be realized, but a yogi need not share what form in which he saw. Okay, we Vaishnavites always think, with the due apologies to Vishnu Mohan Foundation devotees, that ultimately Lord Acharya Shankara, if you go there to Kaladi, the favorite deity was the Krishna shrine there. Okay, and in one of the versions I read that when his mother, he was trying to help his mother to reach that state, what form do you want to see now? No, she mentioned only Krishna. I may be wrong, Madam Kaladi lady is there, so please forgive me. I'm not trying to get into any kind of a clan or group here fighting. We are not Pakistan, India here. But at the same time, this particular verse that you discussed, made me think of my own feeling that there is this kind of a fluid area in which, you see, experience alone attests to the authenticity. In fact, that is one reason why before Dr. Anantagiri brought in hermeneutics, when I was teaching hermeneutics in the English master's course and MPhil course, you may wonder what we are doing in English literature departments, but that was also part of our understanding and so on. They were claiming so much about Western hermeneutics. So I got up and told one professor that there is a great hermeneutical tradition in our Siddhanta and systems. And of course, there is very, very late, almost 17th century. The experience might have been there, but the hermeneutical tradition, Schleiermacher and others, so it came up very late. But here, if you see, in one way, the Alvars, the poets, are also critics. Okay, this is what Sri Aurobindo is trying to say in the both in the future poetry and foundations of Indian culture. There was no division between this kind of intellection and also that experience. That is why there is this fluidity. For instance, you had mentioned that in the conclusion, the last, I think, slide that was shown, two words you used. God's, do I have time? Can I say this, Frank? Can I say this, Frank? Do you have time? Shrikala, can I make this point?
Yeah, please, madam. Please go ahead.
The God's adaptability and condescension. Sorry, I'm not too well, so I don't know whether I'm heard properly. Condescension, because as an English teacher, I always have a fear that condescension may be taken as a kind of a negative word with a negative resonance, that you just show some contempt. Whereas I was quite surprised and happy that in the conclusion you use the two words, God's adaptability and condescension. Dissension, condescension. In that way, the whole sociological superimposition of certain attitudes and valuations are removed. Anathagiri is a great sociologist, and he has a way of making even the simple things very difficult and difficult things complex. So before that, I don't want to say anything, but from my experience, I would say that this is a etymologically interesting site when you use that word condescension. Similarly, adaptability and vulnerability. You use those two words. Am I right, Frank? You said that there is the avatarhood. You see, there is this the desire. There is the adaptability, saulabhyam, which I talked about in the Amalnadipura lecture, and vulnerability. Can you explain what this vulnerability means? Am I clear? Making it clear?
Vulnerability literally means to be able to be wounded, to be deeply touched by something. A vulnus in Latin is a wound, a hurt, like somebody cuts you. And so the ability to be pierced, entered into, cut by somebody else, usually it's used more spiritually, like saulabhya. It's something like that, more or less.
Oh, okay. Vulnerability in that sense.
Yeah.
Okay. You were using that word, or is it from some kind of a commentary, or is it from your translation and commentary?
For which word? For the I was using several different translations.
Okay.
Yeah. I can look.
So what's the difference between this Christian hermeneutic tradition, which you are familiar with, and this tradition that you got yourself acquainted with from 1985, you're saying? Can I just, as somebody who taught hermeneutics from the Western point of view, I would like to know.
I'm sorry, that you would like to know what? That
the way in which hermeneutics is used in the Western tradition, and this kind of a experiential hermeneutical tradition, which you have outlined now by using that one verse. You have used many intertexts, as Derrida puts it, many intertexts, whether it could be Ramayana or Vishnu Purana or Vishnu Dharmottara.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of my own work, and even back 40 years ago, Hans-Georg Gadamer. So Gadamer is truth and method, and the sense of hermeneutical circles, the horizons of interpretation, that whenever one is reading, one is also reading beyond the immediate place in which one is reading, and one is learning differently, and that every author, everyone who performs the text, is also sort of in the text and also at the edge of the text, beyond the text. And therefore, interpretation is the world of the writer and the world of the reader meeting one another. And this sense that it's not simply objective scientific, it is scientific and objective, but it's more than that, because it becomes subjective in terms of, even to dare to say that when I read Poykai Alvar, his poem, in a sense, I'm meeting Poykai Alvar through the words that he composed. And that sense of the ability that words can be the vehicle of encounter is all in the writings of Gadamer. I don't know if you've read Gadamer much, but I always found him the best. Many people refer to Paul Ricoeur, but I find Gadamer, to me, most helpful.
Thank you.
Dr. Padmanabhan sir, Dr. Radha Raghunathan, and Dr. Parthasarathy. In this order, Padmanabhan sir first.
No. By mistake it came. I have deleted that raised hand.
Radha Raghunathan.
I'll wait for Dr. Parthasarathy to speak because I just want to make an observation, nothing else.
Please, Vatsals, go ahead.
We need sound. We cannot hear.
We can hear you very well. Go ahead. No, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Clooney. After a long time, I am seeing you.
That's right. Over a year. Yeah. Thank you for being present.
And you must have heard about this Srivachana Bhushan, in which Pillavacharya says, Paattu ketkumbidamum, Kuppidu ketkumbidamum, Kuditha idamum, Valaitha idamum, Uttum idamum. That 5 positions of Lord, Param, Vyuham, Vibhavam, Antaryami, and Archai. He talks about Archai, about which Padmanabhan gave a very nice description. This Archai only we can mend his form in any way. So
yeah, I think, and that it comes up in at least one of the texts I read talks about the para.
That word. But for me, this because of the Archai, this is possible in our tradition, I think.
Yeah.
If other gods or other systems, they don't have this God and other things. Even in Christianity, this much of avatarams will not be there, I know. But in Sri Vaishnavism, it's a special thing in which we have a lot of gods, and all gods definitely are comparable to each other, but yet everything goes to Lord Vishnu only. Is it correct? Is it correct, my point?
I mean, I think several things there. I mean, one is the idea that all these different forms are pointing to one reality, the reality of the God who is accessible in the forms. And I think we have something of this in Roman Catholicism and the Greek Orthodox tradition, where there's so many icons and images, mortis of Jesus, the Virgin Mary, and the saints, that there's a sense in which if you go into a Catholic church, often there's so many images, like in a temple. And yet, if you ask a Catholic, but all of this is pointing to the one deity, the one God. It's not like 100 different options. They're all starting points, and then they lead to God. So at Christmas time, the child Jesus, Mother Mary, the adult Jesus, Jesus in heaven, all of these are ways of thinking about the same person in the long run. And I think that's similar to what you're saying about in Vaishnavism. There's one person behind all the forms.
Dr. Radha.
Thank you, Clooney.
Thank you.
You definitely deserve the Obey Vedanta title now.
Thank you.
Yeah, he was known as Swami Shuddhananda, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I'd just like to share an anecdote, because we are talking about Poykai Alvar and Lord Ranganatha and other places. I mean, as a child, I have lived very, very, I mean, I've spent my summer holidays very, very close to that Poykai, that pond where Poykai Alvar was supposed to have been found on a lotus, floating on a lotus. And so that was it. And it was my ancestors' place, which we used to visit for every holiday. But that place is gone now. That is one thing. But I was always attached to that Poykai because I have wonderful, memories of playing around that place and falling and everything. And the temple there is that Chonnavannam Seda Perumal. That is Yathotakari, the Lord who did as he was told. That Lord is in a reclining position. Lord Ranganatha, there is a story behind it that when Saraswati was flowing as a ferocious river, he just, rushed and lay across like a bridge, like a setu, to stop her advancing further. But in his hurry, he reclined on the opposite side than what Lord Ranganatha is in Srirangam. This is the story behind that Lord who is in a reclining position in that temple. And also he is not completely reclining as in Srirangam. He is, as half upward, as if he is trying to bless, or he is still yet to lie down. This is the position of that Ranganatha, that Lord, in this Yathotakari temple, which is just outside this pond of the Poykai where this Alvar was found.
Okay,
I just
okay.
wanted to share that anecdote with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe when I come again, I should go and visit and see this.
Yes,
It'd be nice.
surely. Yes, yes.
You can show me how to get there. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, that was a wonderful talk in me, and a wonderful opportunity for me to share this anecdote with everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for that wonderful discussion. May I request Dr. Shimi to wind up the session?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Clooney, for the nice presentation. And thank you so much, all the senior callers, for the discussion. It was really a great learning for us. Now, I invite Dr. Ligita, Treasurer, Global Forum for Young Philosophers, to propose official vote of thanks.
Thank you, Shimi. My humble pranam to all. It is my great pleasure and privilege to deliver the vote of thanks for this enlightening online forum organized under the aegis of the Lalita Forum for Vaishnava Textual Studies. First and foremost, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Sri Padmanabhan, a distinguished member of the Vishnu Mohan Foundation, for his warm and inspiring welcome address that set the perfect tone for today's session. Thank you very much, sir. I express my deepest thanks to our esteemed chair, Professor Srikala Nair, whose presidential address reflected both intellectual depth and profound insight into the spirit of Vaishnavism and its textual heritage. On behalf of the forum, I am thankful to you, dear ma'am. A special and profound note of thanks to our illustrious speaker, Professor Francis X. Clooney, Professor of Harvard Divinity School, Cambridge, for his deeply engaging lecture on God pleasing his people, reading a verse by Poykai Alvar with commentaries. Your deep understanding of the text and the context surrounding Poykai Alvar's work not only shed light on the nuances of the verse, but also connected it beautifully to the broader themes of faith, divinity, and human experiences. Your interpretation of Poykai Alvar's verse has illuminated the timeless relevance of Vaishnava literature. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and perspective, sir. Finally, my gratitude goes out to all senior professors, academicians, and scholars who have taken the time to join us today. Your active participation and engagement are what make gatherings like this so meaningful. As we conclude this session, let us carry forward the wisdom and inspiration we have gained today and continue to cherish the profound legacy of Vaishnava text. Once again, thank you, one and all.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Clooney, on behalf of Sri Vishnu Mohan Foundation and Lalita Forum.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
See you again.
Thank you, all
Thank
the
you.
scholars.
Thank you.
Dr. Indra, Dr. Radha, Sukanya ji, lovely. Great. Parthasarathi sir, for joining us. Made the discussion good, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.